Hi everybody, thanks for joining us for another Facebook Live event this Thursday morning. We're actually not able to do it live today. We're having some technical difficulties. But if you guys have questions throughout today's session, you can still ask them in the comments section, and then Jennifer and I can come by later and answer some of your questions. So today we're here at the Mississippi River Museum in Dubuque, Iowa, just right across the river from us in Davis County. And we have Jennifer Drana here with us. She's the education manager here at the Mississippi River Museum, and she has a special guest with her today. It's an ambassador bird. So Jennifer's going to tell us a little bit about raptor migration along the Mississippi corridor and where we can go to view some of this migration this time of year. So Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. So good morning, everybody. I want to introduce you to my friend, the American Kestrel. This is a type of raptor. So you're actually likely to see these as you're driving around, kind of just outside of town. They like to hang out near farm fields. And usually what you'll see is them sitting on top of those power lines, doing the head bob and the tail bob, which I'm sure you'll see this bird do while we are talking today. What they're doing when they are perched on those power lines is more often than not, they're looking for dinner. This particular type of bird loves to eat small rodents, they'll eat songbirds, and they'll of course eat a few large insects such as dragonflies. So usually they're going to be hunting those small rodents along the agricultural fields. This time of year though, we're actually starting to see a lot of these birds start their journey south. So I always joke that this bird times their fall migration with the dragonfly migration. They don't have to actually even land to be able to catch food. They'll use those very long toes to grab the dragonfly midair, bring it up to their beak, and I always say it's the original fast food. They don't have to land to grab it, which is very, very awesome. Now, usually these kestrels, a large amount of them will move south. They don't go too far south. Most of our population here in the Midwest ends up in the southern U.S. Now, a lot of the other birds that we have this time of year, especially during the summer, their migrations are much longer. So if you're thinking about things like turkey vultures, sharp-shinned hawks, Cooper's hawks, they're really going to shift partly because the weather gets cold, but that's not the biggest reason. The number one reason birds and animals migrate is because of food availability. So if your food starts to disappear because the weather's changing, you got to go with your food. And that's really why those birds move. Now, around here, the best places to find migrating birds is going to be those bluff lands. Because what these birds are doing is they are trying to figure out the easiest way to move from point A to point B. If you have to flap your wings the entire time you are flying south, it takes a ton of energy. But if you can use the wind to help you go, you can save energy. So what these birds like to do is they find the bluffs where the air starts to heat unevenly. And as the air heats up, it's going to create a thermal. Basically, it's a circular pattern of air. So if you think about, if you ever look up in the sky and you see a turkey vulture soaring in a circle, they're riding a thermal. They're riding the air current. For every mile a bird goes up in one of those thermals, we believe that they can glide for 7. So if you think about an eagle, they're pretty big, they're pretty heavy. If they go 1 mile up, that's 7 miles they don't have to flap their wings. The whole time they're gliding down, they're feeling for that next air current to spiral them back up high so that they can start it over again. In the fall, when the weather conditions are right, some of our thermals will actually reach 3 miles in height. So that is a fantastic way for you to cover great distances without actually exerting a lot of energy. So that's where you want to go. If you think about places here in Dubuque, like Mines of Spain or Eagle Point Park, they have those bluff lands where we get those currents. Some days you'll see eagles soaring underneath you. Some days those currents are going to be tall, they'll be above you. But it's a great starting place locally to look at raptor migration. If you are super into birds and you want to take a road trip, one of the best spots in the entire country is actually in Duluth, Minnesota. There on a single day, you can see tens of thousands of raptors move over your head. Now, you got to time it a little bit depending on what bird you want to see. Because like I alluded to earlier, birds are going to migrate at different times in response to food availability. So if you want to see your falcons and your accipiters, this is the time of year, that middle of September into early October to head up there. But if you want to see the eagles, they tend to wait a little bit, so they're going to be more towards the middle to end of October. So you got to kind of figure out what bird you want to see the most of and time your visit that way. So before I take some questions here, I do want to tell you a little bit about why this particular bird is living here at the River Museum. This is an American kestrel that was hatched in 2017. Shortly after he learned to fly, he left the nest box. He actually ended up, we believe, getting hit by a car. His left wing was broken in a couple locations. He went to a wildlife rehabber in northern Wisconsin. They fixed him up, I think, pretty well. Looking at him, you're never going to tell who was injured. But he actually can only fly for about 8 feet. If you're a bird in the wild, you got to be able to sustain flight, and without that, he needs to live in captivity. But you can see that his temperament makes him a fantastic animal ambassador. He's going to be traveling and doing programming with me all over the tri-state area, we hope, for the next decade. So he is doing awesome and a great ambassador for his species. So what kind of questions do we have?
So I am wondering, when you received the American Kestrel as an ambassador, is there some kind of training that you need to go through in order to have an education bird like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what kind of training and background do we as staff and as a facility need to have birds in captivity as part of our ambassador program? Well, the first thing is we have state and federal permits that allow us to have these birds. So we have permits from the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Iowa DNR that say we can have this kestrel as well as a few other birds here at the River Museum to use for education. So he helps us talk about conservation messages. For example, this kestrel I mentioned earlier, super common here in the US. You're likely to see them as you're driving around. But what a lot of people don't know is their population is actually declining across pretty much the entire United States. And so one of the ways that we can get the word out about that and how people can help is by having them meet one up close. So if you have an agricultural field or if you have a lot of property, if you can do native grass plantings, these guys, they love the native songbirds and the native insects. So if you have those healthy food items, you're going to help the kestrel rebound as well. These birds are also cavity nesters. So if you have the ability, you could potentially actually build a nest box and be part of a citizen science project called the American Kestrel Partnership, where you can submit data on how your kestrels are doing, if they're raising a family, how many chicks they have. You can submit that, and then scientists, that information will help them figure out what is going on with the population. Yeah, so that's one of our biggest messages with the kestrel, is kind of what we can do as individual landowners and how we can help these birds of prey around us.
And can you say the name of the citizen science project again that has to do with the kestrel?
Yeah, so that citizen science project is called the American Kestrel Partnership. It is actually run primarily through the Peregrine Fund, which is one of the really fantastic research organizations out there when it comes to raptors specifically. Now, I do want to mention a little bit, if you come across a kestrel, they don't always sit like you see him. You see that he's actually wearing some stuff around his feet, he's sitting on a glove. We acquired this bird in March, and for the first 3 months or so, we worked really hard together every single day to build a trusting relationship. We train our animals here at the River Museum using positive reinforcement training. So basically what we want is them to be willing participants in their day-to-day lives. And that's things like sitting on glove in front of people and doing a program. It's things like, okay, we know that they're going to have some healthcare issues over the course of their life. And so we do train them to let us pick up their feet and touch their chest to monitor for health conditions so that hopefully we can have him until he's 15 or 16 years old. But basically, behind the scenes, if he does a behavior I like, he gets a small treat. Usually we give him a small piece of mouse. It's not that different in how you would train a dog at home or how you would train a significant other. I work very well for coffee, that's fine. It's all the same basic principles, it's just a slightly different species.
So before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about you have a stronger interest in falcons specifically.
Yeah.
So what makes a falcon different than like a hawk or an eagle? So what makes a falcon a falcon?
Yeah, so what makes a falcon a falcon? So all raptors have a few things in common. All raptors are going to have very large eyeballs, that nice hooked beak, and then some nice sharp talons. The falcon, though, has a few additional things. Most of them, not all, but most, will have those nice black stripes under their eyes. They're called the malar stripes. If any of you play ball sports like baseball or football, you might put the all black underneath your eyes. Built-in sunglasses. We actually stole that from falcons, so you can thank them if you ever wear that when you're playing. The biggest thing, though, is actually if you get a close-up look of the beak, they have a tomial tooth, which basically means that the hook of their beak, instead of being nice and smooth curved like the bald eagle, they have a little notch. And that little notch, what they do when they grab dinner, so when they grab a mouse, that notch actually helps them sever vertebrae of their dinner so that they can dispatch it quick and fly off. They're little birds, right? They have to be able to successfully catch dinner without getting injured themselves.
Are they generally smaller? Are falcons generally smaller than hawks and eagles then?
Yes. So falcons on the whole tend to be a little bit smaller. Here in North America, our largest falcon is called a gyrfalcon, and I believe that one tops out at just over 3 pounds. So generally not huge, but they are built for speed. So these are the birds that if you see soaring, they're going to be getting really, really fast. The peregrine falcon is considered the fastest animal on the planet. That bird in a captive setting, so with a falconry bird, they took a falconry bird up in a plane with his trainer, and the trainer jumped out of the plane with a lure, so the peregrine followed. They clocked that bird going 242 miles per hour, and we think they can go faster. Kestrels, they're not going to dive that fast. Their hunting strategy is a little bit different, but both kestrels and peregrines will hunt from a little bit of that dive, and that's why they get the high speeds. In the wild, though, you only want to go as fast as you have to catch dinner. If you're a peregrine going over 200 miles an hour, if you try to catch a duck, chances are you're going to miss the duck and injure yourself. So usually in the wild, they're going to top out closer to 70 miles an hour, but they definitely reach crazy fast speeds. Now, when you look at the bigger birds, their wing shape is different. So they have a slightly different flight style. So the eagle, for example, around here, a bald eagle boy would be about 8 or 9 pounds. A female would be between 12 and 13. They're built for soaring. They're not going to be that speed ambush predator. They're going to just soar and kind of a little bit more slowly grab their dinner. So their wings are very long and flat, and the bald eagle wings stick straight out like a plank. So they have a very big circling behavior that they do right before they come down and catch dinner. Also, you don't have to go super, super fast to catch a fish if you're a bald eagle. Bald eagle, their eyesight is phenomenal. We think a bald eagle, if they're flying around the river, they can see a fish from 1 mile up. Now, they're only able to actually catch fish in the top few inches of water because they don't want to submerge themselves completely. They just want to get their feet wet. So anything in those top few inches is what they're usually hunting for.
So one of the JDCF nature preserves is called the Valley Beam Bird Sanctuary. It's located just south of Stockton, and they have a friends group. There's the Friends of Valley Beam, and this friends group is really interested in starting to monitor kestrels. And so they're going to put up some kestrel nest boxes and establish the monitoring protocol. And can you talk a little bit about what is the main reason for the kestrel's decline in population?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Why are the kestrels declining? There's a number of theories, but we don't actually know. So that's one of the biggest parts of this citizen science research project, and why researchers across the country are doing different things when they're checking out this particular species. Some of our best guesses has to do with human involvement. As we change habitat away from those tall grasslands that they're normally found along, inevitably that means we're going to lose a few individuals. The other thing, though, I mentioned what they eat for dinner. And usually if we have a rodent problem or a bug problem in our household or around our property, our first instinct is to put out poisons. So rodent poison or insecticides, pesticides, all of that actually accumulates in these predators. So it's not that different than, of course, that bald eagle story in the 60s and 70s with DDT. What we know is that if you poison a rodent in your home and that rodent gets out into the wild and caught by an owl or a falcon, the rodent poison will kill the owl or falcon as well. If you put a lot of pesticides on your lawn, that accumulates in the dragonflies and the songbirds in that habitat, which means that the kestrel will also get higher levels, and you can see some impacts from that. So while we're not exactly sure, our best guess is kind of those habitat changes. And so by just being smart about what you put in your yard and making a few changes at your household level, you actually can be part of a bigger movement. I know there's a lot of people that are encouraging a move away from those toxins for many reasons, but it's definitely going to help our native wildlife as well.
Well, great. So, Jennifer, could you show us a couple of the other education birds? I know we have a couple others.
We do. So, do we need to walk with the mic?
I'll walk with this.
Okay.
Here.
I was going to say, I don't have as many hands.
Okay.
So as we kind of walk by, you're going to get a glimpse at our bald eagle behind me. He actually is a bird that is in his 30s now, and he was part of the reintroduction effort of getting bald eagles back to the wild when they were endangered. So he was a great parent to many birds that eventually were released, even though he cannot be released himself. And he just helps us talk about that great conservation success story and helps us launch into other birds that maybe now need our help now. It is a male behind me, and so that again, he's about 8.5 pounds. The reason he looks like he's so much heavier is because of his feathers. One of my favorite bald eagle facts is that a bald eagle has 7,000 feathers. So all feather, but very little actual body weight to him. And then we have one other bird that we actually just acquired
And maybe
this
we don't
year.
need to.
Oh, and,
Whatever you're comfortable with.
And that is our barn owl. So our barn owl helps us talk, will travel like the kestrel and will help us talk about a lot of those similar conservation messages. And I know a lot of people just get super excited when they can see an owl up close. This particular owl was hatched in captivity and raised by people. Owls raised by mom and dad owl typically get stressed in captivity. So this way the bird will be comfortable doing everything we need him to do, teaching with us for the next 20 years. But he's just coming up on 6 months and still has a lot to learn before he's ready to be out like the kestrel.
Wow, very cool. Okay, well, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today. And since we're not live, I want to encourage everybody again, if you have questions for Jennifer, go ahead and just write them in the comments section, and then we can answer your questions that way. So thanks everybody for tuning in to the video today, and we will thank our sponsor, the Apple River State Bank, First Community Bank of Galena. So thanks again for sponsoring our educational programs during this time. Thanks everybody, we'll see you next Thursday.